Hello, welcome to the MMA Girl Podcast with your host, Jess. I'm not in my natural habitat currently. I am sat in the UK because I've come down to the UK for UFC London, guys, which happened 3 days ago now on the 22nd of March on Saturday. So I'm going to be going down the rabbit hole of UFC London Fight Night in a minute. But first of all, I'm going to be going over the latest news in the MMA world. This podcast is not going to be structured in the way it usually is because obviously last week as I was traveling, I was not able to record an episode of my podcast. So this is the sixth episode of my podcast, and it'll be split into two parts because there's so much that I have to talk about. And since we last spoke, so much has happened. So this episode is going to be structured in a two-part series because today we're going to be talking about the highs and lows of the MMA world, all things latest news, etc. And we're going to be going over the Vettori Dolidze card because I didn't get a chance to talk about that fight night from last week. And of course, in the next part of this episode, we'll be going over UFC London and the UFC Mexico card for this Saturday. So stay tuned for the latest news. There'll be stuff that you may have heard about, there'll be stuff you may not have heard about. So let's go. So we have a lot of news to go over today, and I'm going to start with obviously the UFC Netflix deal. Now, I don't know if you've heard about this, but the UFC are obviously looking to leave ESPN at the end of the year. Their contract is up in December, and the UFC were very annoyed by the glitches that happened in UFC 313's pay-per-view, Ankalaev, Alex Pereira. Because I don't think you remember, I remember very correctly, and I think it maybe saved me from the pain of seeing Alex lose his belt. But if you remember, when the ref had to hold up Ankalaev's hand, the whole stream glitched, and we got, instead of seeing Ankalaev getting wrapped around his waist, we saw just a scenery that was the outside of the arena, which is not supposed to happen, of course. So UFC were vexed regarding that. So that adds to the fact that they want to leave ESPN, and it's not working out for them. However, on ESPN's hand, they're a bit disappointed by the pay-per-view model at the UFC because when they signed the contract with the UFC, the pay-per-view buy is apparently very low compared to what they expected. So they're very upset about that. So I think both sides aren't very happy with their end of the deal. So as the WWE has moved to Netflix, the UFC want to do the same thing. And as they're both under the parent company TKO, I think that's the smartest move to make. However, there are a couple of questions I'd have for the UFC Netflix model, of course. Are the pay-per-views going to be the same as before? Are we going to be paying our regular flat rate for Netflix plus $20, $30, $40, $50, $60, $70, $100 for a pay-per-view? As DAZN, their model is kind of like that. DAZN, you pay $14 or $15 a month, plus every time there's pay-per-view you pay $20. Maybe the fight nights will be free on Netflix, and then the rest of the pay-per-views will be in the same way DAZN does their pay-per-viewing. Who knows? I hope not, because I don't really think that will be that advantageous for the fans. But if Netflix come to an agreement with the UFC, they could find a way of making it just as much advantageous for the UFC themselves and the fans, because that's what has to be done. But personally, I think it's a good move to Netflix, but I want to see how they're going to be doing it and how that's going to function. Netflix have obviously said that they're not used to the whole pay-per-view model, but we'll see. Next bit of news is coming from Robert Whittaker. Currently, he is a middleweight fighter, of course. He's held the interim championship belt and is now looking to move up to light heavyweight. This news came as a surprise to me when I saw the interview, but he has expressed a want to go to the UFC's light heavyweight division. He thinks he might have one or two more fights at middleweight and move up to light heavyweight. I didn't think that would happen in my lifetime, to see Robert Whittaker fight at light heavyweight. It's not yet happened, of course. Maybe when he starts bulking heavy muscle to move up to 205, he might find it difficult to outstrike and outpower the light heavyweight fighters that he comes across. So maybe he might regret the decision, or maybe he's already training with light heavyweights and sitting at 205 or more currently and thinks that he will be a good match for the light heavyweight fighters. And don't forget, Rob's not the tallest of fighters, so if he moves up to light heavyweight, he'll be a thicker, stockier light heavyweight. He won't be a tall Alex Pereira, Anthony Smith kind of light heavyweight. So we'll see what will happen from there. But that's the latest from Robert Whittaker, who wants to move up. Speaking of Ankalaev, Alex Pereira happened at UFC 313, of course. The rematch is almost already signed for UFC 319 in Abu Dhabi. Not quite sure if that's an advantage for Alex, seeing as Ankalaev is sort of on home soil, if you like, being in the United Arab Emirates. The rematch has already been signed. Both men are agreeing to the rematch, especially on Alex's end. So the rematch is going to happen, guys. We just have to see whether it will be at 319 or later on. I hope just Alex takes a bit more time for himself and doesn't, throw himself back into a fight because he just wants his belt back and mess it up. Even if he needs a bit more time, he should take it, because even for us fans, I think we don't want to see Alex coming back too quick and then regretting his decision to be there. I also heard that Ankalaev was accusing Alex Vera of being too slippy when he was trying to take him down. When he was up close to Alex's body, he felt he was a little bit too greased up. It was more grease that was allegedly added to Alex's body to make it harder for Ankalaev to get the takedown. I'm not sure if there's any truth in that, honestly, and I'd be quite disappointed if Alex would cheat in that way, and I just don't think he would. But Ankalaev is adamant on the fact that he felt Alex was way too slippy and greasy, so who knows? Since he came out with that tweet, we've not heard any news on that front yet, so maybe it wasn't true. Ankalaev tweets a lot, so half of his tweets are a bit aggressive, some of his tweets are a bit messy, so maybe it's just an accusation. Since he came out with that accusation, he's not said anything more about it, so maybe it was just fake news. Chimaev's manager is coming out with some information regarding the DDP Chimaev title fight. According to his sources, the DDP Chimaev title fight will be on the same night as Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev. That news coming from him, I'm not sure really is very valid, because Makhachev has officially refused to fight Ilia Topuria in a title fight unless Ilia proves himself in the lightweight division. I think he's completely correct, and he has every right to refuse a fight. It's not like we're talking about Tom Aspinall, John Jones, where this guy cannot duck John Jones, and this guy cannot duck Tom Aspinall anymore. There's just no escaping it. This is really a question of someone moving up from his division to the division above him, being a former champion of his own division, thinking that he can immediately have a fight for the title in the upper the division above him, which is completely unheard of, and I don't think it's the correct way of going about things. I totally agree with Islam. I think he's correct in saying, I want to see you in a number one contenders fight before you get a fight against me. Obviously, you've got Arman, who's been put on the shelf since he pulled out of his last title shot. So I think we might see another title contenders match from Arman versus Gaethje or Arman versus Charles Oliveira 2 before we see Ilia get a fight for the number one contendership. But we won't see Ilia get a title fight unless he proves himself against an Arman Tarzukian, Charles Oliveira, or Gaethje, or Dustin Poirier. I don't think Dustin's last fight will be against Ilia. But anyway, that's the latest from Chimaev's manager. Topuria versus Makhachev, I think, will happen one day. It's inevitable, but not yet. Rufi's coming off of the amazing KO victory against King Green, which was the shock of the century at UFC 313. Incredible knockout. And he said that he'll be willing to step in as a replacement on short notice for the Chandler Pimlet fight happening next month at Miami. What a great idea. I mean, he's a hot topic right now, Rufi. The fighting nerds are all hot topics anyway, but in every fight they they participate in, they are the hot topic of the moment. So honestly, not a bad idea to put Rufi in as a replacement, in case anyone injures themselves between Chana and Paddy Pimblett. But I really hope that none of them injure themselves and we get to see Chana Pimblett, because that would be insane. But thanks, Rufi, for the offer. Some fight announcements I've heard over the last few weeks that have been quite important to me. Mario Batista versus Marlon Chito Vera, which is going to be happening very soon. I can't wait to see that. Big fight for Mario Batista. Mario Batista's obviously already been tested at bantamweight, but not against bantamweight competition like Marlon Chito Vera. And as Marlon said, he wants to go back into the title picture in the bantamweight division, so he has to win this fight. So there's a lot of stake for both of these guys, a bit more at stake for Chito than for Mario, but a really good opportunity for Mario to prove himself against a weathered, unknockoutable veteran in Chito Vera. So we'll see how that fight goes down. I think it's happening in May, so I can't wait to see that. Another fight that was announced that I was really excited to see was Bo Nickel versus Derrida. Both fighters are really good on the ground. Bo Nickel is obviously a high school wrestling champion who has tried and has been tried and tested many times now. Maybe they'll keep it on the feet, maybe they won't. But in any case, I can't wait to see it. Ronda Rousey recently commented on Alex Pereira's recent loss to Ankalaev. And she said that it's something that's inevitable in a fighter's career when they get to that height and that stardom. Because she, speaking out of experience, because of course, the last time we saw Ronda Rousey in the UFC octagon, she had lost her belt against the very strong, the very beautiful Amanda Nunes. And just before that, she lost her belt against Holly Holmes. And she knew what that was like, losing your belt when you were the biggest star in the company and starting to be one of the biggest stars in the world because you are one of the biggest stars in the UFC. So she said, from speaking of experience, I know that Alex must have gone through a lot coming from that fight and having to, keep his head up high. And also being the biggest star in the company means you get invited everywhere, you get flown to places, people want to take you places, people want to buy you things, people want to make you experience things. And unfortunately, that kind of takes away your drive and determination from the sport. I don't think in any way, shape or form Alex has lost his spark or his motivation to fight. I just think that potentially he had a lot of time off, a lot of time in Australia, a lot of time, doing things, making appearances, seeing people, and that must have affected in some way his camp. So as Chael Sonnen and DC, Daniel Cormier, was saying on their podcast, they were worried about Alex Pereira before his fight. They were saying he's spending way too much time abroad. He's spending way too much time having fun. And at the time I said in my podcast episode, that's completely ridiculous. Alex knows what he's doing. Alex got all this sorted out. I was wrong, guys. Alex, unfortunately, might have been affected by all that, or it might be other things that were affecting him. But I think in any case, he was a little bit put off by Ankalaev, a little bit put off by the fact that he hadn't maybe put enough work in. And so, unfortunately, we're back where we started. Alex with no belt, Alex waiting for his rematch, and Alex being one of the biggest stars in the company that is hopefully not going to drop off, because as we've seen recently, a lot of former champions are coming from having the longest win streaks in UFC history to having the longest losing streaks in their whole careers. So I really hope Alex will pick himself up and put himself back in the title contention and hopefully get his belt back. But in any case, I think Ronda's got a point. I think she's got a point. Nate Diaz wants to come back to the UFC. Speaking of people who had long losing streaks, Nate Diaz has spoken out saying that he would love to come back to the UFC, but finds the welterweight division currently too boring to even want to come back. So he's looking to come back as soon as the welterweight division picks up and has a more exciting championship picture. But the welterweight division, I think, is really slept on, because I'm a fan of Bilal Muhammad. I don't think he's a bad fighter. I think he, like Marab, are very good on the ground. And unfortunately, their way of fighting and their way of winning fights is just not the way a lot of fans want to see people win fights. So not a lot of knockouts. The only knockout Bilal has had in his whole career was against Sean Brady, who fought on Saturday, who just submitted Leon Edwards, his former opponent and former champion of the welterweight division. So I think there are some exciting things coming, and I think inevitably we'll see a fight between Sean Brady and Bilal Muhammad, but I'll get onto that later. But Nate Diaz, I think he's just, giving excuses why he doesn't want to come back yet. He wants a big star in front of him and he wants a championship fight. He doesn't want to fight for anything mediocre. He doesn't want to work his way back up. He said if he comes back, he wants to come back when the division isn't boring and when he has a championship fight offered to him. So it may not ever happen because I'm not sure if Dana White's going to accept his requests, but I would be happy to see him back. I think anyone of you guys would say they'd be happy to see him back, but you have to be realistic. I do not expect, if Nate Diaz comes back to UFC, for him to have a title fight straight away for the welterweight championship. I'm not really sure how that's going to work out, but we'll see. Another person who wants to come back to the UFC since her last appearance is Paige VanZant, who got a bit of a taste of that UFC magic when she accompanied her husband, Austin Vanderford, whilst he made his UFC pay-per-view debut. She said that walking out with him brought back the memories, brought back the nostalgia, and reminded her why she loved fighting so much and why she loved the UFC so much. So she's looking to come back, maybe. Things are going well for her as that power. I think she doesn't need to come back to UFC straight away. But if this is something she wants to do, then hopefully the training, the discipline, and the cut, if one day she decides to make the jump back to UFC, I hope all that's not too hard for her. But maybe getting back into it, she might decide, nah, I'm going to scrap this. This is just too hard for me. Or maybe she'll be like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted to do. And I'm really happy to be back. Who knows? But yeah, two people who want to come back to the UFC who've not been in the UFC for a while, for a hot minute. So we'll see if they come back. Maybe you guys remember, unfortunately, following his fight against Bahamondes, Jalen Turner announced he was retiring following his loss by submission. And I was saying in my last podcast that I really hope that he reconsiders his decision and that he reflects on his career, looks at his age, his physique, and says to himself that I'm not done yet. But unfortunately, he's decided that he is officially done. And so they've announced his removal from the UFC roster and the UFC's site. So Jalen Turner is officially retired, guys. Really sad to see that happen. But if for his mental health, he thinks this is the best thing to do for himself, then we can only support him in his future endeavors. So sad to see him go, but I'll be happy to see him in whatever he does next, if he does something that's in the public eye. So following the incredible 3-round fight between Fiziev and the one and only Justin Gaethje, the highlight, even though Fiziev lost that fight, the UFC are now considering strongly to take the UFC to his home country of Azerbaijan, and they are in serious talks to organise an event in his country and his hometown. This may happen later on this year or even as early as June. So I'll be happy to see Fiziev main event probably in that card and show us the love and support from his home country fans. So great to see that. I always love seeing the UFC expand their reach to new countries they've never been to before, and can't wait to see what other countries they'll be expanding to next. Charles Oliveira just announced that he thinks the only thing missing from his UFC and MMA legacy is a title fight for the BMF Baddest Mother Effer belt against current champion Max Holloway or someone else if the belt changes hands between now and then. But yeah, Charles Oliveira thinks that he is missing just that from his legacy. We do know, obviously, that Charles Oliveira still wants to get that title back from the UFC lightweight champion Makhachev. So, two potential fights that are going to be happening for him in the next coming months or years. He's at the tail end of his career, obviously, so we're not talking in the next 5 or 10 years, but we're talking in the next 1 to 2 years. The next fights we might see from Charles Oliveira are going to be for a number one contender spot for the UFC lightweight championship belt. And maybe, as he said, a BMF championship fight. And that would be amazing to see. I think Charles is really a contender for that kind of category. Charles Oliveira is a great example of someone who hasn't yet been in the BMF title picture, but truly deserves his spot. I can't really think of anyone else that I would say is of BMF belt contention apart from those who've already touched the BMF belt. So Jorge Masvidal, Dustin Poirier, Gaethje. Obviously, Dustin Poirier's not touched the belt, but he's been in a title fight for that belt, and he rightfully was in contention for that belt. So why not? Max Holloway, Oliveira too. That would be amazing. I'd love to see that happen. And it will be in lightweight this time. So I'll be excited to see how that goes down, if that goes down at all. But I think seeing as Charles Oliveira's got quite a bit of influence in the UFC, and Charles Oliveira is Charles Oliveira, I think if you ask the UFC for a fight against Max Holloway for the BMF belt, he'll get one. So yeah, but Max Holloway, he's got a lot of people who want to fight him right now. I think they want to kick a puppy when he's down, and a lot of people want to fight him. That's a great person to have on your resume, because he's a BMF holder at the moment. He's a great person to call out for a fight that will make a lot of money. That will be a huge fight, and we know the fight will be entertaining as hell. So I get it, but Max Holloway has been called out everywhere. And as he lost his last fight, I think people are saying, Max, yeah, I can fight you. I want to fight you. We get it. Everyone wants to fight Max. So not everyone can fight Max at the same time. But I think he must feel honoured that, for example, Dustin Poirier wants his last fight to be against him, that Charles Oliveira wants to fight him, that maybe Ilia Topuria might have another fight against him. The lightweight division is so exciting and so jam-packed full of talent that we don't know what to expect every time something happens. So I'm excited. A little side note on Conor McGregor. Conor wants to run for president of Ireland. Really? Is this really going to happen? Like, seriously? I don't really understand what's going on. As a fight fan, I just want to see this guy either hang up his gloves and say to us, no, I'm not going to string you guys along any longer. I'm not going to fight anymore. Instead of saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to court, I want to be president of Ireland, but I still want to come back to the UFC. Don't play, please. Conor, please. Just let us know whether you're leaving or whether you're retiring or whether you will actually come back one day, because Michael Chandler waited long enough and had to give that up. And I think anyone that wanted to fight with you as their legacy fight now is just saying to themselves that will never happen. But Conor always seems to keep the hope up that he's coming back to the UFC octagon and that MMA is his true blood sport that he wants to come back to. But he's now looking at being president. How could you be president of Ireland and fight at the UFC at the same time? I know it's not impossible, but come on, choose what you want to do. I don't think Conor's coming back, honestly, but I don't think he'll be a president of Ireland either, because he's not in the good books vis-a-vis the Irish population. So I'm not sure if that's really going to work out for him, honestly. But, we'll see what happens. He might get the Irish public on his side once again. He's Conor McGregor. He seems to be able to get away with just about anything. So yeah, Yoel Romero. This guy, what can you say? What can you say about Yoel Romero apart from that he's putting every person over the age of probably 40 to shame? This guy's 47 years old. He's a Brazilian brute, and he's currently fighting in the heavyweight category at Dirty Boxing Championship, and he, in less than 40 seconds remaining of the first round of his fight this weekend, put away his opponent by TKO in front of John Jones. And honestly, Yoel, even though Dirty Boxing Championship level isn't at the level of the biggest boxing promotions or even the UFC, for a 47-year-old man to still be at the height of his career in a main event is something to behold of. Frankly, respect needs to be put on his name, honestly. And speaking of John Jones, who was obviously present at the Dirty Fighting Championship card, he invested and is part owner of the Dirty Boxing Championship League, along with obviously the creator Mike Perry. And I just, I find that so fascinating and extraordinary that Mike Perry got fired by Conor Pereira from BKFC and created his own league of dirty boxing. Go Mike Perry. And this weekend at the weigh-ins and face-offs, John Jones was obviously present because he's part owner, as I said, and he was greeted by chants from the crowd saying F Tom Aspinall. Like, it's funny when you say F Tom Aspinall 1,000 times. It's funny. But at some point, it's no longer funny. Can you please acknowledge that you are going to fight Tom or not? Because it's the same thing with Conor McGregor. You guys are big stars. We want to see you return. We've obviously seen Jon Jones return. He's not retired yet, but he's not confirming or denying whether he's going to accept the UFC's offer to fight Tom Aspinall. And it's obviously blocking on UFC, on Jon Jones's front, which has always been the case. But this weekend at UFC London, which I'm going to go over in the next part of this podcast, Tom Aspinall did have a meeting with Hunter Campbell and Tom's father regarding allegedly this fight. So maybe there's some news to be coming out on this fight. Maybe there isn't. Maybe they were just updating Tom on the latest Jon Jones news. Because as you saw, Tom came to UFC London with a duck in his hand and was filmed on UFC TV with a duck in his hand. So is that a sign that laughably the fight's going to happen, but I'm still teasing Jon? Who knows? But this whole thing is just, I think getting out of hand. We just need to have this fight already, please. I think you guys saw that Jon Jones said that if this fight would happen, he wants 6 months preparation time. I'm sorry, 6 months? Jon, please. I know that the UFC will give you those 6 months because they want this fight, but please, the fans just need this fight now, please. We'll see what happens, but, as a fan, I just can't wait to see this fight, honestly. And I really hope it happens. I'm really crossing my fingers that this fight will happen. And last but not least, the last bit of news that I've heard about in the last couple of weeks is pertaining to UFC's and Dana White's partnership with Turki Al-Sheikh on his new boxing league. I spoke about that in my last episode. The pay model for this company. I'm looking at it now. It's saying that the contract stipulates that purses will be increased based on the fighter's ability to crack the top 10 of the company and climb the rankings. So you get 20,000 for a 10-round fight by an unranked fighter. You get 50 grand when ranked by the company at number 5 to number 10. You get 125,000 if you're ranked number 3 to number 4. You get $375,000 when challenging for company championship belts, and you get $750,000 when defending a company championship belt. So these are numbers that are kind of worrying people because some veteran fight officials said that this pay scale indicates these takeover league fighters will be younger and mid-level fighters because no Canelos, no Crawfords, no Furies, no Anthony Joshua's will ever accept that kind of money. But of course, it's obvious. So if they are proposing this kind of pay, I'm thinking this will be for guys that are just coming out of small boxing promotions and looking to make their way up in the boxing world. A lot of fighters are saying that they didn't go to the UFC because KSW offered more money or PFL offered more money. But what we shouldn't forget is that if you really want to be at the top of the fight game and be the most well-known fighter in your category, the place to be is the UFC. So I think that Dana wants to go down that route rather than throwing money at fighters that aren't necessarily the biggest names in the sport. So I kind of agree and disagree at the same time. We'll see where that goes from here. But as I said, it's going to be for newcomers and mid-level competitors in the boxing world. So it's kind of in line with their ability, as you say. But we'll see what happens. And I'm excited to see, as I said last week, I'm excited to see what Dana and Turki Al-Sheikh are going to do with boxing, honestly. So there we have it, the latest news. Now I'm going to go on to... and I'm going to move on from all the news, and I'm going to go through the Vettori Dolidze fight card, because I had a few things to say about last week's fight card before we move on to UFC London in part 2 of this episode. So stay tuned, keep listening. Thank you for holding on. And let's move on to Vettori Dolidze before we end this part of the podcast. Right. I just wanted to go over quickly Dolidze Vettori's fight card. It'll be a quick one because it's been a while. So it's not that I don't care about this, but obviously I think you guys are over it. But anyway, let's go over a few things because I wanted to talk about Ryan Spann, who was in the featured prelim against Waldo Cortez Acosta. Some of my thoughts during this fight were obviously why and how is he moving up to heavyweight when his success at light heavyweight wasn't really anything to go to town about. I just think it wasn't a good idea, and the fight he had against Waldo Cortez Acosta in the featured prelim was a very good example of someone who moves up and gets smothered by someone who is a natural heavyweight in Waldo. But let's give it to him. He didn't fold in the first round. He got a few jabs in there. He got a few strikes in there with one knockdown. Honestly, it was as I expected, but maybe he'll come back from this and outperform his other competitors in the heavyweight division. We just have to see. Going over a few other things that happened in the prelims. Josiane Nunes versus Priscilla Correia. I hope I'm saying that right. We've never seen her before in the UFC. She was able to get an amazing KO. We've not seen that from the women in the UFC in quite a while. Josiane Nunes was knocked out clean, and in the first round, just over 2 minutes. So mad respect for her opponent. Hopefully she'll be getting some more recognition for her talent in the next coming months, and maybe get another fight very soon. And the first prelim fight was between Eunice Dubin and Carly Judas, which ended also in KO from Carly, who won in very nice fashion. And then the third fight was between Daniel Barres and Andre Lima, and Andre Lima got in a third round submission, which is incredible. Carlos Vera versus Josias Musasa. Carlos got a submission in the first round. So a very exciting prelim card, guys. So Apex or not, the prelims were great. I've just been to UFC Fight Night London, and in the prelims I think there's maybe one submission, maybe nowhere near as many as some of the Apex fight prelims. So, first round KO for Valleyhorse against Choi. I said that he was going to do that, so I'm very happy. One of the only predictions I got correct. Valleyhorse, a really dangerous competitor in the featherweight category, so this weight class has got to watch out for him. Ribeiro got the submission over Dolidze. Again, Ribeiro, I said he'd win this fight, and I said he'd submit his opponent, so I'm glad I got that right as well. Damon Blackshear versus Cody Gibson. Damon won that fight via submission in the second round. I didn't say Damon would win. I didn't think he'd win, so congratulations to Damon Blackshear. A really dominant performance against Cody Gibson. Hernandez Holobo ended in decision for Hernandez, which was, a nice performance from both guys. Really dominant performance. I kind of thought Holobo got stolen from, honestly. I think it was theft, honestly. Looking at the stats now, the only upper hand that Hernandez had was with the takedowns, and that's what made the difference for the judges in this fight. In terms of significant strikes and striking overall, Holobo was way above Hernandez, but Hernandez got the decision victory, so good on him. And obviously Njokuani versus Dos Santos ended in a second round TKO by Njokuani. I thought maybe Dos Santos would pull off a win here, but he did not, and it was a very dominant performance from Njokuani. Njokuani came in and conquered to get the TKO win. And now for the main event, Vettori versus Dolidze. I predicted that Dolidze would get the win. I'm not saying that because he won. You can check my last episode. I'm not lying. Because already Dolidze has only got 3 defeats and had only got 3 defeats before coming into this fight. I didn't think he'd get another L, honestly. He was coming off a loss against Vettori in the last fight in 2023. I honestly thought he'd get his revenge, and he did. What a dominant performance from both guys. The fight was really close. When you watch the fight over again, you can tell why Dolidze won, but it was a really competitive fight anyways. Dominant performance from both guys. In terms of damage, Dolidze, you could say, came out with a bit more damage. Both guys stayed on the feet. A lot of strikes, a lot of strikes overall. But unfortunately for Vettori, he didn't get that win, so he needs to rethink what he's going to do now and what's next for him in the middleweight division. I think Dolidze should go up against potentially a top 5 competitor in the lightweight division. I think he deserves a chance at a top 5 contender. And I would love to see him have a fight against someone who is dominating the middleweight division currently. So, and there's a lot of, it's like the lightweight division, there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of choice in the middleweight division. So I'm not worried for the Dolidze. I think he'll find a super opponent next. And as time goes on, the matchmakers at UFC will take more time in choosing who's next for the Dolidze, because he's a star we need to build up. He was accompanied to the octagon by Murad Dvalishvili, of course, because he's a fellow Georgian. It was really nice to see, and I think the Georgians are having a great run at the UFC at the moment, and it's the Georgian takeover, guys. You know, let's see. When we talk about UFC London later, the Georgians did not get their way last Saturday, but we'll get onto that. That was my quick lowdown and debrief of the UFC's Dolidze versus Vettori 2. So yeah, that was it for me on this episode, this part of episode 6. Tune in for part 2 of episode 6 coming straight after this episode, where we're going to be talking about UFC Fight Night London, where I am currently, and all my experience on that fight card, and the UFC Mexico fight card for this Saturday. We're going to go over the prelims and the main card, and do my main card predictions as we usually do. So thanks for tuning in, and stay tuned for part 2. Bye.